The National Student Financial Aid Scheme Board Chairperson Karen Stander has blamed a 10.6 billion rand oversubscription in university funding for some of the widespread student registration issues during the 2025 academic year. Stander attributed the shortfall to several key factors, including a growing number of qualifying students, the ongoing cost of living crisis, expanding household eligibility, and a decline in state resources in real terms. Now, NSFAS has been facing mounting criticism over its operational failures, which have affected thousands of students at universities and TVET colleges. And to help us provide some insights into recent governance and administrative developments within the organization, we're joined virtually now by the CEO of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, Waseem Carrim. Thanks so much for your time, Waseem. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to your viewers as well. Yeah.
So, so many issues, and this is always a hot topic. But NSFAS continues to face serious challenges, and it's affecting thousands of students across our universities and TVET colleges. What is being done right now to save not just the career opportunities for these students, but also for NSFAS to right what is wrong within its systems?
Yeah, thanks, Sakina. So I think if you look at NSFAS, and I think let's first focus on the positive elements of the fund, right? Across NSFAS's history, prior to being TEFSA, and as it was a loan scheme before being converted into a bursary scheme, collectively NSFAS has supported 5.5 million graduates in the South African economy. And of course, we know graduates have the highest form of employment. Many of them go on to have social mobility. They become professionals, they become entrepreneurs. So I think we have to focus on the key role that NSFAS has played in South Africa's democratic dispensation. That does not disguise the failures of the institution, right? And how it continues to be inefficient and ineffective in how it supports students on a day-to-day basis within the ecosystem, right? And I think we need to reflect on some of the decisions that have been taken around NSFAS here, right? Particularly the one decision which shifted it away from being a loan-based scheme into a bursary-based model, which, as we know, was a very quick decision that was taken, and the organizational structure and design did not necessarily evolve with that decision here. Yeah? Now, what you have is that 7 or 8 years later, and in that time, NSFAS has had a great deal of leadership instability. It's had 2 administrators, it's had 2 different boards that have been dissolved, it's had 9 CEOs, I think, in 9 years, yeah. And all of that instability has led to the fund not being in a good position to be able to support students. And what you have now, as you correctly described in your opening remarks, is a fund which has more dependencies associated with it and not enough resources to support the number of beneficiaries that it should. Yeah. So really what we see as NSFAS is you first need to develop a great deal of stability as an organization. It's an organization that is in ICU. You need to stabilize it, and then you need to reform it so that it becomes responsive to the needs of young people and students in South Africa.
And while that admission is welcomed, Waseem, unfortunately, the cost is real for the students who depend on this funding. I was just looking through some articles, thousands of students, reporting delayed allowances, the allowances that are not paid timeously. In some cases, and we've seen this where students and student bodies in some instances have had to rally to try and feed some of the students who go hungry as a result of this. It results in homelessness. We've been reading about evictions recently for some TVET college students, and students being unable to attend class, which also then contributes to the dropout rate. So these are very serious. So how do you respond to the human cost of these operational failures?
Yeah, so let's talk about those one by one, right? So in terms of allowance payments, I think it's important to recognize that NSFAS makes about 800,000 allowance payments per month. And over the last 5 months, we've been pretty consistent as an organization as part of our stabilization plan to make sure that those allowances have been paid on time to students, right? So I think that one there, despite our manual processes, we've been pretty okay over the last few months in achieving that. Of course, student accommodation has structural issues. There's just insufficient, safe, secure student accommodation in South Africa. But a big part of the stabilization plan has been to work with accommodation providers, work with housing associations in saying, let's not blame the students for this crisis. Let's work together to prevent student evictions. And the NSFAS team, as part of that stabilization plan, has gone throughout the country to work one-on-one with accommodation providers in resolving accommodation claims so that it doesn't affect the students. So on those two counts, I think we have a stabilization plan, and for us, it's being implemented and it's working pretty effectively. I think the last component that we're trying to address, and which yesterday's media briefing was largely about, is we've got a large cohort of students that have been unable to register because of the budget deficit here. And a big part of the work that we've been trying to do is work with the Department of Higher Education and Training, work with the National Treasury in the reprioritization of funds in supporting those students to be able to register. We feel that we're fairly close to a solution on that matter, and that at least will give us some stability for the 2025 academic year. That then makes us think about what the future looks like, and the fact that we are running what is a very unsustainable business model, and we need to start thinking about what a sustainable funding and financing framework for the higher education sector is.
So if we look at the system to pay directly to students, and that has also come under fire because it was meant to streamline the payment of these allowances. But you look at some of these reports, students are still, giving significant backlash to NSFAS, even in this regard. So where do you think the failures are with regard to your systems, the ICT systems? Are they fit for purpose right now, Waseem? If not, what is the plan?
Yeah, certainly our ICT systems are not fit for purpose, right? And then that's why one of the decisions that we took was that, the disbursement of allowances, particularly at the university level, should be handed back to the universities, because the universities have better capacity to be able to execute on the function of disbursement of allowances to students. Yeah. When it comes to the TVET colleges, our ICT systems are definitely not fit for purpose. NSFAS runs very manual-based systems. Of course, I think we need to be aware that systems development is a structural process that needs to be undertaken. NSFAS has tried in the past to be able to execute on new systems, and those have not been successful in nature. Just generally, my experience, the state doesn't have doesn't have a great history with systems development here. Yeah. And that's why I think it's an area where we are approaching business to say, where can, as part of the social compact in South Africa, where can business support NSFAS in reforming our systems, in understanding that where the fund produces graduates, those graduates will in their majority be absorbed by the private sector. So we've got to find the right kind of collaborations if we're going to fix this fund and fix it once and for all. Yeah.
And, it brings me back to the human cost. And I'm loath to harp on it, Waseem, but I think you appreciate, what a serious issue this is, especially for students whom this particular scheme are meant to assist. And, when they cannot find the necessary support, it really is a dire situation that adds to an already existing crisis within youth unemployment. Right, we seem to have lost that connection to Waseem there. Unfortunately, Waseem Carrim speaking to us is the CEO of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. And just talking to him about some of the issues with regard to the systems. And you've heard Waseem acknowledge there that perhaps the ICT system, not necessarily fit for purpose, but they have approached business to try and help them with this particular matter. Waseem, I believe we do have you back. Thank you so much. So I just want to move on to something else now with regard to something that you touched on, speaking about the feasibility of, your current financial standing right now as NSFAS, and what needs to be done in that regard. Is the funding system for NSFAS, is it viable? And if not, again, what sort of plans are in place to ensure that students coming through the system this year and beyond will be able to be funded along with those already in the system?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, right? So the system is not sustainable. Just to give you a trajectory, in 2023, NSFAS ran a budget deficit of about 2.5 billion. In 2024, that increased to 5 billion. As we've mentioned, this year the deficit is 10 billion. If you just take that as a trajectory, next year the deficit will be 20 billion, right? And you can't run a fund like that. It's part of why it's such an inefficient and ineffective scheme, because you're continuously having to shift around money to be able to support your students here. Yeah. So we have to think about what a sustainable funding model for higher education looks like, right? And the minister spoke about a reimagination of the post-school education and training system, right? And I know these are difficult conversations that we need to have, but they are important ones that we need to have, right? The reality today is that out of all of NSFAS beneficiaries, only 1 in 2 will end up graduating. And you've spoken about human cost during this interview. What is the human cost of a person who qualifies for university, gets admitted, maybe completes 2 years, but never finishes, right? How and the labor market regards that person as just a matriculant here, yeah? So we have to talk about the efficiency and the effectiveness of the scheme, right? And I think part of that discussion has to be about the fact that to be a success in life, not everybody needs to go to university here, yeah? We have to create multiple pathways through the economy for young people in South Africa. And we can create a universal amount of pathways through the economy. And we need to think about how we bring in other players outside of NSFAS, the sector education training authorities, community colleges, technical and vocational colleges. Because unfortunately, the reality seems to be that to be a success in life, one must go to school, one must get a university degree, and one must become part of the professional class. And I think changing that societal attitude is part of a sustainable funding model here. Yeah? The other element that we need to think about is how do we better support students so that we don't focus on access and funding of students, but rather graduation and employment of students here. Because the outcome of our education policy in South Africa has to be employment and productivity. Otherwise, all of these funds that we're investing, and we invest a considerable amount, we're one of the largest bursary funds in the world. What is the return on investment that the state is actually generating from all of these funds that we put into young people and students? Yeah.
So just as we're starting to wrap this, Waseem, as a result of the budget deficit, how many students have been excluded, and unfairly so, by NSFAS as a result of that?
Yeah, so we have about 34,000 students which are impacted by the budget deficit, and then quite a considerable amount of students at UNISA need to register for their second semester modules are also impacted. But as I've mentioned, we are working with the DHET and the National Treasury to try and resolve that matter as soon as possible. Yeah.
And, just looking at what is happening, is NSFAS intending to implement significant changes in the immediate term, just to ensure that the students who are currently in the system, Waseem, can actually access the funds that are needed? Or is the situation of such a nature that there will unfortunately be students who will fall through the cracks here?
So our commitment is that we're going to try and support every eligible student who meets the criteria for the 2025 year. And I also want to give reassurance that NSFAS remains in a position to continue to pay allowances, to continue to pay tuition, to continue to pay accommodation providers. Yeah. So that's our commitment for 2025. But we want to temper with the fact that there has to be the start of a reform process going forward, because we really cannot continue down this trajectory. Yeah.
Indeed, we can't. And I'm hoping that perhaps we can speak and set up something where we can take this conversation further. Because, Waseem, there's also the question of exactly how NSFAS plans on, funding or supporting the missing middle. How is the capitalization fund going to support the missing middle students who don't qualify for NSFAS funding per se, but that's a cohort of students that also need attention.
Most certainly so, and I think Cabinet resolved on that matter by introducing the Missing Middle Loan Fund from 2024 onwards. We haven't seen a a great deal of uptake on the missing middle loan fund, and we're looking into the reasons for why there doesn't seem to be much uptake on the loan fund. But certainly a model that supports students who meet the academic criteria to be admitted to university and lack the resources due to financial exclusion. We have to, as part of a sustainable funding model, we have to look at how we support collectively students in South Africa so that they're able to gain the skills they need to contribute meaningfully to our economy.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much more to discuss, but time is unfortunately against us. That was the CEO of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, Waseem Carrim, providing insights into recent governance and administrative developments within the organization.